On the last day of 6th grade, Miss Richards, a sweet hippy-dippy-ish young woman who had no command of discipline and would probably not last long in the public education system, tried to recite for Chuck's class some verse of Walt Whitman's Song of Myself.
Continuing our trend about talking about movies in theaters this month, tonight we're discussing Mike Flanagan's The Life of Chuck.
He has a wife, Ginny, to whom he is scrupulously faithful, and an intelligent, good-humored son in middle school. He also has only 9 months to live, though he doesn't know that yet.
Although his student films apparently gravitated towards melodrama, and he grew up too easily scared to even watch horror movies, Mike Flanagan has become basically the definitive Stephen King filmmaker. He might not have watched many horror movies as a kid, but he read Stephen King's novels voraciously. As a student, he directed 2 student films and then began his film called Ghosts, which would become Ghosts of Hamilton Street, that he kept working on after he graduated and finally finished in 2003. He went to Towson University in Maryland and filmed it with local actors, only finishing it because a friend who had gotten hit by a Papa John's delivery driver decided to invest his settlement into the film. Inspired by his experience struggling in school, Ghosts of Hamilton Street was about a troubled alcoholic writer whose friends and family start disappearing one by one. Next, he made the short film Oculus Chapter 3, The Man with the Plan, intending to turn it into a series of short films. But a lack of cash meant that it was made for $1,500, and the film Oculus would emerge much later.
The next known owner is an American railroad tycoon by the name of Robert Clancy. Robert Clancy is rumored to weigh over 300 pounds. Now, he hung the mirror in his ballroom in Atlanta. Later that year, Robert Clancy is photographed by a small local newspaper, and in that picture, he appears to weigh no more than 100 pounds. Unfortunately, Robert Clancy, his estate, and the glass are supposedly destroyed in Sherman's March to the Ocean.
Mike Flanagan showed the short film at film festivals, but didn't want it to be another found footage film, and he wanted to direct it. In 2011, Mike Flanagan financed his film Absentia on Kickstarter, which is considered like his real feature directorial debut. Made for $70,000 in his apartment in Glendale, this is where his beginning as a horror director really started. In 2012, 6 years after his short, Intrepid Pictures signed a deal to allow Mike Flanagan to shoot Oculus. It was produced for a budget of $5 million and released in 2014. Oculus starred Kate Siegel, who Mike Flanagan would marry in 2016. The theatrical distribution would be done by Relativity Media, who also agreed to distribute, and Intrepid Pictures to produce, Flanagan's next film, Before I Wake, which would be finished in 2015, just as Relativity Media went bankrupt. The bankruptcy meant that it was pulled from the release schedule more than once, pushing it into 2016. Mike Flanagan co-wrote the film Hush with Kate Siegel and released it with Blumhouse. In 2017, Mike Flanagan directed his first Stephen King adaptation, Gerald's Game, a novel he had read and been terrified of as a kid. It was a 1992 novel that was considered unfilmable for a long time. He cast Carla Gugino and Bruce Greenwood about a woman who is left handcuffed to a bed in an isolated house when her husband, who she was there with to rekindle their marriage, suddenly dies of a heart attack. In 2019, Stephen King let Mike Flanagan write and direct the sequel to The Shining, Dr. Sleep. It's famously known that Stephen King really didn't like what Kubrick did to The Shining. Even though it's now one of the most beloved and iconic horror films ever made, Stephen King didn't really believe it was an effective horror film and hated his changes.
The film is extremely cold. Stanley Kubrick saw The Haunting as coming from Jack Torrance, from the Jack Nicholson character, whereas I always saw it from outside. So we had a fundamental difference of opinion about it. I always thought that the real difference between my take on it and Stanley Kubrick's take on it was this. In my novel, the hotel burns. In Kubrick's movie, the hotel freezes. It's a difference between warmth and cold. But the images are striking. There's no doubt about it.
So it was a big deal that he trusted Mike Flanagan to do the sequel. Tonight we're talking about Mike Flanagan's third Stephen King adaptation, The Life of Chuck.
Any idea who he is?
None.
I've asked 24 people, at least. Nobody knows. Our man Krantz is the Oz of the apocalypse.
Starring Tom Hiddleston as Chuck, Mia Sara from Ferris Bueller, and Mark Hamill, Karen Gillan, Jacob Tremblay, Carl Lumbly, and Chiwetel Ejiofor, with appearances by Heather Langenkamp and Matthew Lillard, narrated pretty heavily by Nick Offerman. The story told in 3 very distinct parts. The first part is more dystopian and absurdist, with a teacher named Marty and his ex-wife Felicia living through the terrifying and puzzling end of the world, ending with a whimper. Pieces of the country break off, there are floods and earthquakes.
But this just 60 different varieties of shit. It's just so much shit. It happened fast. It's like a year, man. 14 months. Sucks.
The internet goes out, and everywhere you see signs saying, Charles Krantz, 39 great years. Thanks, Chuck. But nobody knows who Chuck Krantz is or has ever heard of him. At the end of the night, right before the world ends, you see Tom Hiddleston's Chuck Krantz dying in the hospital bed, and his wife says, 39 great years. Thanks, Chuck, and kisses him before he finally dies. The second part, Nick Offerman tells us that Chuck Krantz has 9 months to live but doesn't know it. He tells us the story of the accountant, Chuck Krantz, seeing a busker playing drums and stopping to dance in front of a crowd with a young woman, a complete stranger, joining in his dancing. We're told that this was Chuck's best day, and as his mind goes from the brain tumor, this is the memory that keeps him going even as the lights, memories, and everything turns off in his head.
What he will remember occasionally is how he stopped and dropped his briefcase and began to move his hips to the beat of the drums. And he will think, that is why God made the world.
The third story is about Chuck's early life. His mom and dad and unborn sister all die in a car accident. He lives with his bubby and Zadie, played by Mia Sara and Mark Hamill. His bubby teaches him how to dance, but she also dies, collapsing in a grocery store when he's 10.
That lady who was in here a few weeks ago, the one who died, where was she when it happened?
It's a little creepy, kid.
She was my grandma.
Now living with his alcoholic grandfather, who swears that upstairs is a room where you see ghosts of people who are going to die, Chuck keeps dancing and takes a dance class in high school, even though his daddy wants him to be an accountant.
What's in there? Right between my hands, right now.
I don't know.
All the people you know?
I guess.
Just the people you know? Everything you see. Everything you know. The world, Chuck. Planes in the sky, manhole covers in the street. Every year that you live, that world inside your head will get bigger and brighter.
He's also introduced to the Walt Whitman poem, Song of Myself, that says, I am large, I contain multitudes. The multitudes are the people he meets, who live on in his head and memory as the characters we see in the first part. And the dialogue and actors recur in both parts. After Zadie dies, and Chuck walks into the ghost room, he sees himself on his deathbed from a brain tumor. Each of these parts isn't just a different story, it's filmed almost as a different genre of film, giving it the feeling of a story anthology. And yet, by the end, it all comes together. Discussing life, death, and grieving, Stephen King's work has often been about the issues he grapples with, but I think there's a directness and a sweetness to it that you wouldn't necessarily expect, as well as the humor of a movie like Stranger Than Fiction maybe is the first thing I thought of. Not to say Stephen King just does horror, he doesn't, but it's not wrapped in the allegory that he often writes with. Mike Flanagan, who is known for his monologues, keeps so much of the original Stephen King narration through Nick Offerman. It's a really fascinating adaptation, especially the reverse chronology, with the strangest part first, like it's daring you to stick with it.
What happens to that universe if someone, I don't know, hits a patch of ice and goes off an overpass or...
Don't worry too much about those things. Just remember that you contain multitudes, Chuck.